Okay, you're all set. Go ahead. I'll edit it from that point.
Hello everybody, this is Christine. Today we will be reading Life Story by Virginia Lee Burton. It's a beautiful story that tells the story of life on Earth from its beginning up to now. What we're looking at here is the beautiful cover to Life Story that was illustrated by Virginia Lee Burton. And it starts over in this corner with tiny little beings and comes all the way up through the stages of life to fish, which we'll read about, dinosaurs, more dinosaurs on this side, and some of the animals that we know, horses, camels, elephants, and then all the way down here to the corner to talk about man. And now we'll open up the book. And this is another beautiful illustration that Virginia Lee Burton did, similar to what we saw on the front cover, that looks at all the stages of life from tiny insects through plants, amphibians, which we'll learn about in just a few minutes, dinosaurs, and then again some of the animals that we know, horses, camels, elephants. It looks like a rhinoceros down here too. And this was all hand drawn by Virginia Lee Burton. And then we'll go to the next page, and down here in the corner you'll see that the book was signed by Virginia Lee Burton in May of 1962. The way that this book is set up is very much like a play, is set up with scenes and acts. So as we go along, I will let you know when we change through the play to different stages. And this is a beautiful diagram on this side, and I'll read from the top to the bottom. The top says our galaxy, the Milky Way, and then next is our solar system. Next is our planet, Earth, satellite, and moon. Then hemisphere, continent, country, state, city, and the city that we're in is Gloucester, and then street, and then house. And if any of you are familiar with the story of the Little House, that's what we see right here. And up above that picture of the little house is a beautiful window with stars, and there's a little book right here that you can see on the windowsill, and it says, "To Lee from Ginny," dated May 6th. And Lee is actually Lee Natty, who is Virginia Lee Burton's editor at Houghton Mifflin. So we'll begin our story now. And the program, just like when you go to see a play, this program says Life Story by Virginia Lee Burton. And all the table of contents of the play. And now we'll begin. Eons and eons ago, our sun was born, one of the millions and billions of stars that make up our galaxy called the Milky Way. Our galaxy is one of the millions and billions and trillions of galaxies whirling around in space, which make up the universe. Our sun is not the biggest star, nor is it the smallest, but to us it is the most important star of all. For without the light and warmth from our sun, no life could live on our Earth. Our Earth was born millions and billions of years ago, one of our sun's family of 9 planets. Our Earth is the 3rd planet out from the sun. It is not the biggest planet, nor is it the smallest, but to us it is the most important, for it is where we live. Our Earth turns once around on its axis every 24 hours, which makes one day, and it takes 365 days, or 1 year, to travel once around the sun. That is how we measure time. Thousands of millions of years ago, our Earth was a red-hot, fiery ball of matter, surrounded by clouds of dust and swirling gases. hurtling through space as it traveled around the sun at the speed of 1,100 miles a minute, or about 66,000 miles an hour. There are many and varied theories about how our moon was born. Some say it was once a part of the Earth, which spun off into space. Some say it was a separate and smaller ball of matter, but nobody really knows because there was no one there. Anyway, our moon circles our Earth about once a month, or to be exact, every 29.5 days. Way back in time, when our Earth was young, no life could have lived on it. Its surface was a red-hot sea of lava, and its center was a white-hot liquid rock. Thick clouds of steam, dust, and gases hid the sun. Flaming hot meteorites from outer space bombarded it. Hundreds and thousands of millions of years passed by, and gradually the surface of our Earth began to cool. As it cooled, it hardened into a thin crust of rocks. Rocks that have been solidified from a liquid condition are called igneous rocks, or fire-made rocks. Slowly, the crust of our cooling Earth began to shrink, and as it shrank, it wrinkled like the skin of an old dry apple, except that our Earth's wrinkles were great high mountains, low valleys, and deep ocean basins. The ancient rocks were squeezed, pushed, and folded up and down. Heat and pressure changed them into another kind of rock called metamorphic rock, which means changing in form. Thick, dense clouds of steam still hid the sun. Life may have been present at this time, but there is no record of it. The clouds opened, rain poured down in torrents on the now cooled surface of our Earth, filling ocean basins and wearing down the mountains. Rivers and streams carried little particles of rock and deposited them in layers on the floors of the oceans. In time, these layers of sand, gravel, and clay hardened into rock called sedimentary rock. It is believed that life was present at this time, but there is little, if any, record of it. The scene is laid underwater. The story is based on records of fossils found in the sedimentary rock, 500 million years old. The ancient life of this time was made up of sea plants and little animals without backbones, called invertebrates. The most highly developed of these ancient animals were called trilobites. They ruled the seas for 100 million years. Life continued in the warm, shallow seas. The rule of the trilobites was over. Another kind of invertebrate sea animals, called cephalopods, now played the leading role. The name cephalopod simply means having feet on the head. Squid and octopus of today belong to the same family. No life lived on land but the lowly little lichens clinging for dear life to the bare rocks, the pioneers of the plant world. The scene changed as the land slowly rose. The seas retreated or evaporated, leaving salt deposits. A few of the water plants left high and dry became land plants, the ancestors to the liverworts and the mosses of today. The cephalopods had decreased in size and in number. Sea scorpions had taken over the rule of the seas. Little jawless fish appeared on the scene. The first animals to have backbones were called vertebrates. Land plants flourished, clothing our once bare earth in green. Ferns made their first appearance at this time. Also early forms of horsetails, club mosses, and scale trees. These plants, instead of creeping along close to the ground, had roots of their own, stems and leaves, and stood up, reaching for the life-giving warmth and light of our sun. The long age of invertebrates had come to an end. Seas, lakes, rivers, and streams swarmed with fish, big fish, little fish, and medium-sized. A few even developed lungs and crawled from puddle to puddle on the land. The land was low, the climate warm and moist. Great swamp forests covered much of our earth. This period is called the Age of Plants, or the Coal Age, because most of the coal that we use today comes from these ancient plants. Amphibians, another kind of vertebrate, appeared on the scene. They were animals that lived their early life in water and their adult life on land, like the frogs of today. Insects were present and abundant. Now the mountains rose high, the climate turned cold and dry. Glaciers formed and swamps became deserts. This was a time of crisis in our Earth's history. Life, in order to survive, was forced to adapt or to change. Hardy seed-bearing conifers replaced the swamp trees. Land-living reptiles displaced the amphibians. Reptiles lay hard-shell eggs on dry land. Amphibians lay soft eggs in the water. The climate grew milder. Streams and rivers eroded the mountains. Reptiles continued to play the leading roles. Dinosaurs, members of the reptile family, appeared on the scene. Dinosaurs, instead of crawling on their stomachs, stood up and walked on 4 legs or on 2. A few of the reptiles returned to a life in the water. Once again, the climate was warm and moist. Some of the plant-eating dinosaurs had grown tremendous. Some had developed armor for protection from their meat-eating cousins. Some reptiles had learned to fly. The first real bird appeared. Little mammals were present, but they played a very small part at this time. Mountains were slowly rising. The climate was growing cooler. Shallow seas flooded the lowlands. On land, sea, and air, the reptiles ruled. Now flowering plants appeared for the very first time. Mountains continued to rise. The climate grew colder and colder. The shallow seas retreated, leaving deserts. One by one, members of the ruling family of reptiles disappeared from the scene, never to be seen on Earth again, except as fossils in museums of natural history. The scene had changed. The once high lands were now low. The cold, dry climate had turned hot and humid. Dense tropical forests covered most of the lowlands. The few survivors of the reptile family now played a minor role. The leading roles had been taken over by birds and mammals. Mammals bear their young alive and take care of them until they are old enough to take care of themselves. Both birds and mammals are warm-blooded animals, while all others are cold-blooded. Now volcanoes began to erupt and mountains started to rise again. The climate grew a little cooler and drier. True grasses increased and spread at this time. They are members of the great family of flowering plants. Mammals were developing and experimenting in various forms. Although they are ancestors of our present mammals, it is difficult to recognize some of them. Mountains continued to rise and volcanoes continued to erupt. The climate grew steadily cooler and drier. Grasses spread rapidly, making the open plains instead of forests. Plant eaters changed their diet of leaves to one of grass. The rule of the mammals was now at its height. A few of them grew very big and tall, the largest land mammals of the time. Volcanoes and mountains building had reached their climax at this time. The climate had grown exceedingly cold and dry. Life was very difficult for the plants and animals. Grasses had dried up and the plains were now deserts. Earlier forms of mammals had become extinct. The surviving forms now looked more like the mammals we know today. In the north, great glaciers formed and slowly moved southward, scraping the land bare. This time in life's history on Earth is called the Ice Age. 4 times these great masses of ice advanced and 4 times they melted and retreated. Man was most probably present at this time, but he played a very minor role. The appearance of man on the scene happened only a short time ago as compared to the long length of time that all other life had been present. Prehistoric man lived in caves and discovered the use of fire. He made tools and weapons of stone or pieces of bone. He hunted the wild animals for food and clothing, and he painted pictures of these animals on the walls of caves. Man learned how to cultivate plants and domesticate animals for his own use. Instead of wandering around and living in caves, he built houses and lived in villages, towns, and cities. He found out how to build boats and to sail on the high seas. With the development of languages, recorded history began. Historians tell the story of the rise and fall of the great civilizations of the Old World and the discovery of the New World. The scene is now set in the New World, not long after it was first discovered. Here the early settlers cleared the land, cutting down the trees and building log cabins. The many rocks and boulders left by the glaciers were used to build stone walls and to divide up the land. The life of the early settlers was not an easy one, but they did not mind. Now, for the first time, they were working on land of their own. When our grandparents were young, our country was mostly a farming country. The wilderness had been turned into rich farmlands. The farmer worked hard to make a living from the soil. He rose early to milk the cows and to feed livestock. In the springtime, he plowed and planted his crops. In the summer, he cultivated them and made hay, and in the fall, he gathered the harvest and stored it away for the winter. And now, a few generations later, the once well-cared-for farms were deserted. The farmers had either gone west or moved into the cities. The fields were overgrown with briars, bushes, and trees. All that remained to show that man had lived here were the stone walls dividing the land and a few old apple trees. "25 summers have passed quickly since we bought the old orchard meadow and woodland and moved a little house and my barn studio into the middle of it. The old apple trees have been trimmed, the woods cleaned up, and in the meadow we have put sheep to keep the grass down. Evergreens and flowering plants have been planted. Ferns and mosses grow by the running brook. Here is where we raised our children until they grew old enough to begin living a life of their own." And what we see here along the side of the page are some beautiful illustrations by Virginia Lee Burton talking about her family. The season has changed from summer to fall. The days are shorter and the nights are longer. The air is cooler and the first frost nips the plants, turning the green leaves to bright red, orange, and yellow before they are caught by the wind and flutter to the ground. Only the hardy evergreens are not affected by the cold. The sap in the trees and shrubs sinks low to the roots, and the seeds for next year's plants have been shed. Many birds fly south to escape the winter. Last winter was a long and cold one, with freezing temperatures, icy winds, and snowstorms. When the sun did shine, it gave out very little warmth. Down in the frozen ground, life in the plants slept beneath a blanket of dead leaves and deep snow, resting and waiting for the coming of spring. Little by little, the days grew longer. In the first month of spring, the snow melted and the ground thawed. Day by day, week by week, the grass grew greener. Gentle showers encouraged the early spring flowers. In the trees, the sap that was rising, swelling the new buds. Under the ground, last year's seeds began to stir and awaken, pushing tender shoots up through the earth and dead leaves, reaching up for the light and warmth of the sun. And the birds returned from the south. Yesterday was a day to remember, one of those beautiful warm spring days when one could almost see the plants growing. Lowly little lichens clinging to the rocks brightened. Liverworts and velvety mosses carpeted the damp ground. Ferns pushed up and unfurled their delicate fronds. New bright green needles tipped the evergreens. Buds opened and tiny little leaves unfolded, and the apple tree burst into blossom. In the meadow, the sheep grazed happily on the tender new shoots of grass. The miracle of spring was here. As the afternoon hours slipped by and the sun began to sink in the west, the shadows on the ground gradually lengthened. Just before the sunset, it turned fiery red, tinting the sky and the earth bright pink. High overhead, a pale new moon appeared. By the brook, the frogs were singing their song of spring. The new moon had set and darkness had fallen. One by one the stars had come out, millions and billions of stars trillions of miles away. The Big Dipper hung high in the bright spring sky, pointing out the steady standing North Star. Low on the horizon gleamed the Milky Way. Inside the house, the hands of the clock showed that another day had passed and a new day had begun. And now it is dawn, dawn of a new day, a day in spring. Minute by minute the light brightens in the east, turning from cold gray to deep blue to delicate pink. The birds are singing gaily as they await the return of the sun. Down in the green meadow there is a new baby lamb. Now I leave you and turn the story over to you. Look out your window and in a few seconds you will see the sunrise. And now it is your life story, and it is you who play the leading role. The stage is set, the time is now, and the place wherever you are. Each passing second, a new link in the endless chain of time. The drama of life is a continuous story, ever new, ever changing, and ever wondrous to behold. And that is the end of Life's Story and the end of our play for today. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I look forward